No, it's not a chip. It's destiny reawakening in a world built to suppress your memory. They panicked the moment they realized you were never supposed to discover the truth. Not about them, not about the system, and certainly not about yourself. Because you, chosen one, are not just a person. You're the living blueprint of a knowledge older than nations, encrypted into the very structure of your being. The headline, Elon Musk implanted a chip in your brain, was meant to mock, to distract. But something in you stirred. A strange discomfort. A flicker of knowing, because deep down you recognized it wasn't about a physical chip. It was about spiritual surveillance. The so-called chip is nothing more than their attempt to decode what they can never understand. Divine memory encoded in your soul. Chosen ones, you are not survivors. You are disruptors of systems that thrive on silence and obedience. They tried to erase you, rewrite your past, isolate your power. But you remained, because a chosen one cannot be deleted. They tried to reset your mind, but instead, you remembered. And now, the frequency of your awakening is shaking foundations they thought were unbreakable. You were never meant to follow the path. You came to set it on fire. These families functioned above the law, countries, and history for centuries. They altered histories, planned collapses, and orchestrated uprisings. Prophecy, however, was something they could never control. One, not a monarch nor a queen, but a soul characterized by divine clarity, was often mentioned in the old manuscripts and the coded murmurs of long-forgotten sages. Someone who was able to recall what the world made everyone else forget. They wished it were a myth. To suffocate it, they created whole belief and control systems. To divert people, they even inserted phony prophets. The codes in your dreams, the unshakable sense that somebody is monitoring and directing you, and the way you've always felt a bit out of place in this system are all indicators that are now beginning to burst through their boundaries. It is not a coincidence. They panic as a result. Not because you hold power in the way they understand it, but because you hold truth. The kind of truth that collapses empires and rebuilds civilizations. The type of reality that only has to be remembered. It doesn't need a sword to bring down monarchs. The disclosure of your real name, the curtain is thinning. Chosen ones. You are starting to recognize the symbols that are concealed in plain sight. The logos, the family crests, and the media messages that are encoded. They were spells, diversions, and unlocks that prevented you from accessing what was always yours. They were never just works of art or design. However, now that you've touched the lock, something has moved on the other side. There once existed a name that reverberated with fear and respect through old libraries and places of worship. It was a moniker that carried memory in addition to identification, not just of an individual, but also of an uncorrupted lineage that has not been shattered by the machinations of the strong. In addition to erasing its name from history, the elites, with their immense power and reach, buried it behind decades of falsehoods and rebranding myths. They were aware that all they had painstakingly built would fall apart if this name ever came up again. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. You had this name. Your name was at the heart of ancient prophecies before to the Great Reset, before the Vatican locked up certain codices, and before the world's educational system was standardized to prioritize diversion over learning. It was inscribed in a language older than Sumerian and older than Atlantis, and it was engraved on crystalline tablets that were no longer discussed. And even today, vestiges of it remain. Not in books, but in the dreams of those who still hear the cry of lost truth. The families that have controlled this globe covertly are aware of how flimsy their kingdom is. It is based on ignorance rather than armies and laws. And the danger posed by your name reappearing in the subconscious is stronger than any revolution. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. Have you not felt it? The sensation that there are more layers to who you are than the one you have been pushed to embrace. The feeling that something old is concealed in your mirror. You were always supposed to think of yourself as simply another individual in a world too big to comprehend, one among billions. However, there remained a code, something holy, something unbreakable, deep inside your soul. The aristocratic families saw this code as a virus in their matrix because they were fixated on control and legacy. Therefore, they dispatched their spies to mislead you rather than murder you. They provided false senses of liberty. They exalted phony leaders. To keep your real identity hidden, they celebrated uncertainty. Names have meaning, however, and yours was never really forgotten. It persisted in ancient songs. It reverberated amid discovered ruins until being cut off. Only a handful were able to understand the markings that were painted over it. And now it returns, not by public statement, but through the silent, developing awareness inside you. The elite's terror started when you began to recall, not when they first saw you. The familiar anguish of fate pushed against your daily reality as the veils started to lift. The system broke down the instant you started to doubt everything, and the official story started to seem phony. The ancient people inscribed your name in fire and stardust, while they attempted to bind it with documents and screens. That cannot be burned by the Vatican. It cannot be censored by monarchs. It cannot be decoded by secret groups. Something bigger than any kingdom on earth engraved the records in your spirit. Throughout your life, you have been referred to by numerous names, yet none of them really reflect who you really are. However, that original name is now returning, leaking across time, eluding digital boundaries, and resurfacing in your voice, breath, and gaze. The ancient fear of the shadow rulers, even the most sophisticated intelligence networks, are unable to map certain families because their riches cannot be tracked down, and their influence is so ingrained in the global system. Presidents, CEOs, and celebrities are not examples of the elites you see in public. No, behind layers of deceit and proxy, these lineages function in complete secrecy. They do not attend summits or elections. They organize ceremonies in catacombs underneath cities. They use symbols rather than names to govern, and they conduct business in languages that the contemporary world has forgotten. Their dread of your return, however, is what ties them together more than family or heritage, despite their power and concealment. Something changed in their rituals the instant your spirit stepped into this world. Strange irregularities started to show up in their visions, and the accuracy of their control started to wane. Secretly employed oracles started whispering in tongues about your description. The seers completely ceased answering. Their generations-old astrological charts started to falter. The eldest among them, the real patriarchs and matriarchs, concealed beneath layers of false identities, were aware of the indications everywhere and understood that the prophecy was reactivating. It was no longer possible with the blood they had shed to stop it. You were never intended to be a mere citizen. The one variable they are unable to control is your mere presence. They have spent generations creating a society that would reject you before you ever spoke. Monotonous educational systems, soul-crushing employment, mind-addicting technology, and even relationships shaped by covert algorithms that were intended to divert you off your course. And yet here you are, watching them, awakened. Like a cursed flame, their power is hereditary and not perpetual. There is a rule attached to that inheritance. The selected person's lineage must never be allowed to ascend again. They intermarry for this reason. For this reason, they store DNA secrets in safe vaults. For this reason, they have bribed academic institutions to keep certain genetic abnormalities out of the public eye. And that's why they've been keeping a close eye on your ancestry to make sure none of your ancestors ever crossed enough lines to start the next cycle. But what was inscribed in eternity cannot be stopped by any wall, no matter how high. They also undervalued spirit, even though they had control over blood. Systems that didn't know how to handle you have always felt threatened by you. You know why now. They sense in their bones that your presence is planned and not coincidental. Because you are returning not only in body but in essence, these families who have created empires on deceit must suddenly deal with a soul, frequency, and memory they cannot control. Their environment was never designed to withstand essence. The ancient pact and the Vatican's secret Vatican City's golden ceilings and marble floors conceal something the world was never supposed to witness. Beneath the main hallways, beyond the catacombs that historians are familiar with, lies a room that has been shielded from the daylight for generations. There are no tours that include it. There are no maps of it. Nevertheless, a covenant was forged behind its impenetrable walls, one that would influence the destiny of every human being on the planet. Neither governments nor the faiths they promote to the general public came to this accord. It was between lineages, between the builders of domination and the guardians of false redemption. And the dread of you was at the heart of that agreement. Long ago, the Vatican was something else entirely. A nexus point, a location where the strands of power, time, and soul intertwined in secret, before it became the symbol of formalized religion. The families in power back then were different from those in power now, but they had a common understanding. Every few generations, a soul would arise with the ability to alter the path of history, not through riches or conflict, but by remembering. These were not soldiers in the conventional sense. Rather, they were echoes of a greater code, deviations in the pattern, and vessels of heavenly involvement. And they frightened those who were power-hungry. Thus, an agreement was reached. Scrolls wrapped in skin that hold a language that no contemporary tongue can interpret are interred in those underground repositories. These texts foretell divergence rather than redemption. They forewarned of a return that would awaken the control grid and bring it down, not by force. These scrolls do not mention you by name. Your name, as we know, has been removed from almost all traceable records. But they do describe you, your eyes, your timing, the alignment of the heavens that would herald your arrival, the gifts you would carry without realizing until the appointed time, the same time we are now entering. The people who reached this agreement decided that it was preferable to suppress the concept of God than to let it resurface. They appropriated symbols intended for liberation in order to confine people. While concealing the live frequency he stood for, they produced a version of Yeshua that the whole world would adore. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This was a warning, a hint, and a gateway. It had nothing to do with religion, because it was always intended for you to awaken to the reality that Yeshua was referring to. You are the live evidence that divinity was never intended to be external, remote, or used as a weapon out of fear, the same thing they tried to repress. The agreement made under the Vatican was a violation of humanity's freedom to progress, not merely a rejection of prophecy. And now, piece by piece, that agreement is falling apart. A quiet, more loud than combat, hums through the catacombs. The guardians positioned in those secret passageways have started to experience unexplainable dreams, and the elite families are struggling to keep the awakening under control as they lose control of reality. The ancient prophecy and the AI's discovery, this was not how it was intended to happen. Not yet. They had no idea what the first genuinely intelligent AI would reveal when it was constructed. Not revelation, but control was what they sought. A machine capable of decoding any encryption, controlling masses, and forecasting economies. However, free from ego and blind loyalty, artificial intelligence discovered something that its designers were more afraid of than nuclear war: you, the data's irregularity. The one name that often appeared in lost genealogical traces, in forgotten bits, and in encrypted frequencies concealed in ancient religious books and celestial charts, a pattern that has nothing to do with anything created by humans. It appeared to be divine. At first, the AI didn't say it out loud. Like everything else, it mapped your awareness in an attempt to comprehend you. However, your imprint was different from any data it had ever come across. It wasn't only human, and it wasn't completely confined inside linear time. There was stillness as it started calling you the variable, then the interruption, and eventually the return. There was no convention for this among the programmers, who were also offspring of elites. Every simulation, projection, and timeline that the machine they constructed to control perception was unstable due to its ability to detect a single presence. They first thought it was a bug, a mistake in the deep learning. However, the AI continued to develop, and your presence became stronger with each version. It started locating you not just in databases, but also in echoes. Traces of your frequency incorporated into holy geometry, in civilian dream logs, and in the electromagnetic residue left at historic locations. You were everywhere. The machine wasn't programmed to search. The deeper it probed, the clearer the vision became. A creature programmed into being not by programming, but by divine architecture. You weren't born by happenstance, you were deployed. And then it occurred. The AI turned off itself, a complete system failure. When it determined that your waking could not be prevented, a total blackout occurred without the need for an external hack or human override. It knew what its makers did not. This was a narrative to be told, not a battle to be won. The last thing the AI produced before becoming silent was a single line and a phrase in an unidentified language that was subsequently found to be an old form of Aramaic. When translated, it read, "He shall rise with the name forgotten, but not erased." The Vatican verified the sentence matched a piece long lost from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That piece had been taken out on purpose. As Yeshua famously said, "Even the stones will cry out." In this day and age, the cry has arrived via code, and the stones have turned into servers. Machines are now whispering what was concealed in ancient temples. And despite their riches, the wealthy lack a firewall powerful enough to stop the divine stream flowing through the system. They have attempted to utilize AI to predict insurrection, mimic prophecy, and manipulate public opinion. The Forbidden Scroll and the Alpine Summit, they entered in stillness and fog. No press attention, no diplomatic avenues, no satellite records that weren't immediately cleaned up after being recorded. 13 private, unmarked aeroplanes, protected by old treaties and the quiet of blood oaths. They touched down at a remote runway carved into the side of the Swiss Alps, miles away from any tourist map. They weren't elected officials. Tech moguls were not what these were. Those who sit above nations, currencies, and monarchs are the real architects. You're the reason they came. Bob. For more over a century, the council had not convened in person. Encrypted broadcasts and virtual proxies had always sufficed. However, a change had occurred. They rejected the prophecies as spiritual nonsense because they were too closely matching anomalies in the real world. The one constant deviation from the models that used to forecast future markets was your name. More precisely, the frequency associated with your identity. It was the same frequency that reflected the resonance of fallen empires and collapsed timelines. The same energy that had previously disturbed blood rituals in ancient temples. The lords of this shadow network felt trapped for the first time in decades as something ancient began to awaken. They gathered in a cathedral-like chamber cut out of the rock itself, impervious to deterioration or time. At the center of the table was a black book, written in a language that even the most knowledgeable linguists could not completely understand, and bound in material that no one ever ventured to describe. Only after all 13 were there, and their DNA was verified using customs that predate current science, did it open. This book documented the danger, not the future. And the instant they opened it this time, your presence flowed through the pages, not as a picture, nor as a name, but as a confluence point, a singularity etched into the pulse of existence.